Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world, the paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world operates under a fundamental misreading in this timeline, that the boy who lived arrives at Hogwarts as a blank slate, a wide-eyed orphan ready to be claimed by their narratives. They are wrong. On the night the candles first flare to life above the Great Hall, an 11-year-old boy steps onto the stone, not as a tourist of wonder, but as a quiet executioner in training, while the other first years gape at the floating ceiling and whisper about ghosts. Harry Potter's gaze never lifts higher than the faces, the staff table, the 4 house benches, the shadows in between. He is not looking for magic. He is looking for a man who is not a man, a name that is a wound, a rat. Peter Pettigrew. In canon, this moment is a coronation of innocence, the beginning of a school story. In this timeline, it is the opening move of a manhunt. The world thinks it is welcoming a symbol, a living monument to a victory they barely understand. What actually walks through those doors is a child who already knows who sold his parents to Voldemort, and who has come, without words, without announcement, to collect a debt. The sorting hat will call for courage or cunning. Harry is listening instead for any whisper of Pettigrew, any flicker of soul resonance that might betray a coward hiding in plain sight. This divergence does not begin at Hogwarts. It begins on a chokingly ordinary summer night on Privet Drive, where the Dursley house is meant to be a fortress of willful ignorance. One overheard argument. Vernon, red-faced, hissing at Petunia about your freak sister, that Potter and his friends, Black and the other one, the rat, cracks the facade. One slip of a name, Pettigrew, follows, spat with the careless cruelty of people who believe the boy cannot possibly matter. And one burst of accidental magic triggered by a child's raw panic and rage sears that word into plaster and memory alike, scorched letters burning on the kitchen wall until they have to repaint. From that night, Harry's childhood bends along a darker axis. He is not merely surviving the Dursleys, he is collecting fragments, testing every adult lie against that name, turning Privet Drive into a low-ceilinged arena where he rehearses mistrust, a weapon being polished in the dark, without guidance, without context, but with a methodical certainty that someone, somewhere, chose his parents' deaths. By the time the Hogwarts letter arrives, the central illusion of the wizarding world has already failed in him. Authority does not impress. It interrogates. Hagrid's stories are cross-examined for inconsistencies. Dumbledore is not a benevolent legend, but the head of an order that either failed to protect the Potters or chose not to tell their son the truth. Even Voldemort is no longer a nameless terror, but the endpoint of a chain of decisions, one of which belonged to Peter Pettigrew. This is not merely an earlier reveal grafted onto familiar events. It is a structural failure of every long game around Harry Potter. Dumbledore's careful pacing of information fractures the moment Harry begins hunting for Pettigrew in school rosters and family histories. The Ministry's triumphalist narrative cannot survive a boy who asks the wrong questions about secret keepers and Azkaban. Even Voldemort's contingency plans, built on the assumption of a confused, malleable child, misfire against an 11-year-old whose first instinct in the wizarding world is to identify and neutralize a tactically lethal animagus hiding as someone's pet. Hogwarts Year 1, therefore, is not a nostalgic tour through moving staircases and chocolate frogs. It becomes a covert investigation threaded through classes and corridors, a forensic reconstruction of a war conducted by a child who refuses to forget that it already claimed his family. Every familiar moment, the sorting, the troll, the stone, will be relit under this colder lamp as we trace how a single burned-in name turns a schoolboy into a hunter. Today, we deconstruct that hunt from its first step into the Great Hall and follow the quiet line of Harry's gaze until it settles, at last, on a very ordinary rat. Halloween 1981. Rewritten, The Rat in the Walls. We return to Godric's Hollow not as mourners, but as auditors. The legend softens the edges. The record does not. The Fidelius charm is, on paper, an elegant fortress. One soul holds a secret so completely that the world itself forgets the coordinates. In canon, the tragedy is framed as fate and miscalculation. In this timeline, we treat it as an engineered failure. James and Lily agree to hide. Sirius Black, reckless and loyal, is the obvious secret keeper. And then, in a cramped kitchen that smells of overboiled tea and fear, they make the switch to Peter Pettigrew. The world calls it trust. They are wrong. Under the skin of the spell, there is a different word. Transfer. The instant Dumbledore seals the modified Fidelius, the true location of the Potter's home slides from Sirius's grasp into Peter's trembling hands. That transfer has weight. Magic, in this darker reading, leaves bruises. When Voldemort walks through the front door with methodical certainty, he is not simply following information. He is walking along the fresh scar of a promise inverted. Harry is in his cot when the curse rebounds, when the house becomes a shattered thesis on overconfidence. But the Fidelius does not vanish cleanly with his parents' deaths. It collapses through him. The moment the secret breaks, the architecture of betrayal presses against the only living mind still anchored to that address. We name this residue the echo of the secret, a soul resonance that does not give Harry memories, but brands him with a visceral, nameless revulsion at the idea of a rat, and a choking, physical horror at the sensation of being handed over. Dumbledore arrives to collect the child and the narrative. In canon, he takes Harry and leaves behind silence. In this timeline, haste betrays him as surely as Peter betrayed the Potters. Among the rubble lies a half-charred Order of the Phoenix report, its ink bubbled, its sentences fractured. One line survives intact enough to matter. Pettigrew confirmed as secret keeper for the Potters. Dumbledore pockets it, then loses it again. It does not vanish into the war. It drifts to Privet Drive. Weeks later, an experimental howler, drafted for Petunia, and never sent, is misdirected by confused ministry clerks. It arrives at number 4, explodes across Vernon's pristine kitchen, and in a shrieking parody of authority, spits 2 crucial phrases into the air: Pettigrew and secret keeper. Vernon does not understand the mechanics of the Fidelius, but he understands leverage. In a later argument, red-faced and shaking, he weaponizes those foreign words at Petunia, spitting about your freak sister, her secret keeper, and that Pettigrew rat who got them all killed. Harry is 5. He is listening from the hall. He does not gain clarity. He gains fixation. The echo of the secret, already coiled around his nervous system, suddenly has a name to orbit. Pettigrew. Rat. Secret keeper. The boy who lived is no longer just a passive symbol of hope. He becomes a masterpiece to be molded by accident, a weapon being polished in the dark by every overheard slur and half-explained insult. Voldemort's curse failed, but the geometry of betrayal around the Potters imprints itself on their son, giving him a subconscious target long before he understands the war. The Wizarding World Files, Halloween 1981, under conclusion. The neat first page of The Boy Who Lived myth. In the Slytherin timeline, it is not an ending. It is a seed, buried under the stairs of Privet Drive, fed on cupboard air and whispered arguments, waiting for one more word, one more glimpse of a very ordinary rat to ignite. And when that word finally arrives, the entire narrative of Hogwarts will shift around the boy who hears it. Privet Drive, the night the name Pettigrew slipped. The ignition comes on a Tuesday evening in the most aggressively ordinary kitchen in Britain. The world will later insist that Harry's story begins with a letter on the doormat and a half-giant on a rock. They are wrong. In this timeline, the first true divergence is a voice raised behind a thin white door and the arrival of a letter that smells faintly of ash. It drops through the slot with an odd, singed flutter, thicker than bills, heavier than catalogues. Harry, on his knees in the hall, scrubbing a scuff from the skirting board, feels the air tighten as the envelope skids to a stop against his bucket. The parchment is yellowed, the ink an impatient dark slash, addressed not to him, of course, but to Mr. and Mrs. D. Dursley, guardians of Harry James Potter. That word, guardians, lands like an accusation in the stale Privet Drive air. Petunia sees it first. Her hand snatches, knuckles bloodless, and for a heartbeat, Harry glimpses the seal. Not Hogwarts, but a phoenix impressed in cracked red wax. Old order business, forced through Muggle post. A last resort from someone who has waited too long. The argument begins almost immediately. Voices, at first a low, poisonous murmur, as the kitchen door slams and the bolt grinds home, then rising, fraying. Harry, by now an expert in the acoustics of his own captivity, abandons the scuff mark and slides silently to the door, pressing his eye to the keyhole, his ear to the thin wood. The world, on the other side, is sound and shadow, the clink of dishes as Petunia grips the counter for balance, the wet, Meaty slap of Vernon's palm on the table. Words leak through in jagged fragments. Potters, your freak sister, Dumbledore, enough is enough. Then, clearer, venom sharpened by fear. She trusted the wrong friend, Petunia. That's what it says. Secret keeper. Some rat named Pettigrew. The name hits like a physical blow. Soul resonance, buried since the cot and the green light, surges up his spine. Petunia's reply is a hiss, brittle with a decade of repression. Dumbledore said the rat died with them, Vernon. With Lily, with James. We were not to speak of it, ever. The word rat crosses the name Pettigrew in Harry's mind, and something in the air snaps. The kitchen light overhead pops in a shower of glass. The hallway bulb explodes a fraction of a second later, plunging the house into a sudden electric dark. The cupboard door, his cupboard door, does not merely rattle this time. It detonates off its hinges, slamming into the opposite wall hard enough to crack plaster and split the framed photograph of the Dursleys at the seaside clean down the middle. For one suspended instant, the house is a fortress under bombardment. Then, silence, ringing and absolute. Petunia emerges first, face chalk white, eyes fixed not on the wreckage, but on Harry, who stands in the corridor breathing hard, splinters at his bare feet. She understands, with a precision born of childhood letters from Hogwarts, exactly what this means. She has said too much. The weapon she tried to bury under the stairs has just twitched in its sleep. A weapon being polished in the dark by neglect and anger rather than love. Vernon blusters in her wake, moustache bristling, voice pitched too high. He roars about freakishness, about never again, about forbidden words in his house. The letter, half crumpled on the table, is shoved into a drawer that will never quite close properly again. But the damage is already written, not on paper, but in Harry's memory. 2 terms lodge there with methodical certainty. Secret keeper, Pettigrew, not an accident, a choice. That night, banished to a mattress on the floor of the smallest bedroom as punishment and upgrade, all at once, Harry lies awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling where the street lamp carves thin bars of amber. He does not know what a Fidelius charm is, cannot map the politics of the Order, has never heard the phrase, the Slytherin timeline. None of that matters. What he understands is brutally simple. Someone chose to tell the monster where his parents slept. He whispers the name into the silence, tasting it like a curse. Pettigrew. Again. Pettigrew. The syllables become a rhythm, a vow, a quiet declaration of war the world does not hear. No adult will ever volunteer the full story, so Harry begins to assemble his own, one forbidden word at a time, already turning toward a future where Hogwarts is not a sanctuary, but a hunting ground. From victim to hunter, a childhood rewired by betrayal. From that night onward, Harry's grief is not a mist. It has a name, a culprit, and a direction of travel. Canon Harry grows up with a vague ache, a hollow where parents should be, filling the absence with half-formed fantasies of faceless figures waving from the edge of memory. In this timeline, that softness is burned out early. His loss acquires edges. He does not simply miss his parents. He broods on the deliberate act that delivered them to death, replaying the overheard argument until it calcifies into doctrine. Pettigrew told him. Pettigrew chose. Each repetition is both self-soothing and self-sharpening. A child forging a theology of betrayal in the dark. The impact on his relationship with authority is immediate and corrosive. Adults are no longer an amorphous category of bigger people who know. They are potential conspirators in the greater mission. When Aunt Petunia's voice tightens on the word car crash, he notes the micro-hesitation. When a primary school teacher praises his imagination about magic, he files away the patronizing tone as evidence that grown-ups will lie rather than admit ignorance. He begins cataloguing inconsistencies with methodical certainty. Who changes their story? Who dodges questions? Who looks away when he mentions the scar? Authority loses its automatic legitimacy. It becomes a series of levers to be mapped, tested, and eventually pulled. To survive Privet Drive, he learns to make his mind a fortress and his talent invisible. Good marks are achieved but not flaunted. Insights are offered, then withdrawn, as he experiments with how much cleverness draws suspicion. He perfects the art of silence at the dinner table, saying just enough to appear compliant, while his inner narrative runs several moves ahead, a weapon being polished in the dark. They think he is cowed. They are wrong. His self-directed training emerges from necessity, then hardens into ritual. Dodging Dudley and his gang becomes a daily exercise in stealth and terrain analysis. Which alleyways offer blind corners? Which fences can be scaled quickly? How to vanish behind a bin at the exact moment a larger body lumbers past. Television, one of his few legal escapes, turns into curriculum. Crime dramas teach him about alibis, informants, and the quiet power of those who simply watch. News segments about unexplained explosions or freak storms are not accidents to him. They are potential moves in a hidden war. Each headline interrogated for signs of a world that once killed his parents and then pretended nothing happened. Emotionally, he does not become numb. He becomes armored. He still wants connection, but the knowledge that one friend once sold his parents for survival rewires the terms of engagement. Easy friendliness feels like a trap. In the privacy of his cupboard, he rehearses confrontations with the unseen Pettigrew, running through every possible excuse: fear, coercion, misplaced loyalty. With each hypothetical plea, he trains himself to hear the emotional manipulation underneath and to reject it. Mercy, if it ever comes, will be deliberate, not reflexive. This inner discipline creates a particular soul resonance long before a wand ever chooses him. He is not waiting to be told who he is. He is waiting for his first real opportunity to act. And beneath all of it, a quiet, dangerous conclusion takes root. The adults who know the truth chose to leave him in ignorance. When a giant on a rock in the sea will one day speak of Dumbledore with reverence, That name will meet not awe, but analysis. A headmaster who deals in half-truths, an order that buried the real traitor. These are not mentors in his mind, but variables. Hogwarts will not feel like rescue. It will feel like insertion into enemy territory. The next phase in a hunt that began in a cupboard under the stairs. Hagrid, Diagon Alley, and the first fracture with Dumbledore. The Hat on the Rock should be a rescue. In this timeline, it becomes an interrogation chamber with a leaking roof. When Hagrid bursts through the door and announces that Harry is a wizard, the boy's expression barely shifts. This is not revelation, merely confirmation that the Dursleys' fear had a concrete source. The real pivot comes when Hagrid, fumbling with the cake and the umbrella, mutters that Harry's parents were murdered by you-know-who. The word lands, but Harry does not flinch. He tilts his head instead, voice unnervingly calm, and asks the question no 11-year-old is supposed to know exists. Who told him where they were? The silence that follows is heavier than the storm outside. Hagrid's massive shoulders bunch. His eyes dart away, to the fire, to the door, anywhere but the boy's face. It is the flinch of a man who has rehearsed one narrative for a decade and just discovered it is not airtight. They are wrong, Harry notes. Not about Voldemort, but about what he can bear to hear. In that tiny hut, authority begins to fracture. By the time they reach the leaky cauldron, Harry has logged every hesitation, every evasion, with methodical certainty. The pub's reaction to him is a wave of awe he experiences as data, not comfort. Names and half-remembered toasts swirl around him until one cuts through. Sirius Black. Someone whispers that Black betrayed the Potters, and the room tightens with ritualized hatred. Harry's internal alarm screams. Because in a kitchen on Privet Drive, Vernon Dursley, drunk on his own bitterness, had spat a different name, Peter Pettigrew. The discrepancy is not a curiosity. It is his first concrete proof that the Wizarding World story is wrong. On the way to Diagon Alley proper, he presses. Hagrid, lumbering and loyal, tries to deflect with talk of wands and schoolbooks, but Harry circles back with the precision of a small prosecutor. What is a secret keeper? What is a Fidelius charm? Who was there the night his house exploded? Under that steady, dispassionate gaze, Hagrid cracks just enough to be dangerous. We all thought it was Black, he mutters, beard trembling. But Dumbledore always said it was. Complicated. Complicated. A single word that confirms an entire architecture of omission. Somewhere between Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew lies a decision. Which lie to tell the child? Goblins who look at him with a measuring, almost predatory intelligence clearly know far more than they say. The Potter vault yawns open like a stone fortress, filled with gold but stripped of context. No photographs, no letters, no trace of James and Lily as people rather than martyrs. Everything about his legacy has been reduced to currency and a school list, prearranged by a headmaster who has never spoken to him. This is Harry's first true soul resonance with the Wizarding World. Not wonder but recognition, another system of power that expects his obedience while rationing truth. Standing in the bright chaos of Diagon Alley, surrounded by owls and cauldrons and children chattering about houses, Harry makes a private vow. He will learn magic, yes, but more importantly, he will learn to read this world's lies as fluently as he learned the Dursleys. Because somewhere in this maze of half-truths, behind Dumbledore's complications and the Ministry's official traitor, is the full story of Peter Pettigrew. And when Hogwarts' doors finally open, he will not be arriving as a grateful orphan. He will be entering enemy territory, a weapon being polished in the dark, already hunting for the rat hiding in plain sight. A mission boards the Hogwarts Express. Platform 9 3/4 is supposed to be Harry's first true miracle, the moment the hidden world unfolds in steam and scarlet paint. They are wrong. In this timeline, he steps through the barrier as a reconnaissance agent, not a wide-eyed child. Every detail is intake, assessment, categorization. Which parents speak of the last war as if it were a closed chapter, and which say, when he comes back, with the flat pragmatism of ongoing conflict, which children flinch at Voldemort's name, and which only at the social impropriety of saying it aloud. The platform becomes a living dossier, not a wonderland, a fortress of red brick and iron, where the enemy might already be boarding. He notes the families whose eyes linger on him with too much calculation, who measure the scar, the fame, the political capital. He notes with equal care those who refuse to look at all, as if ignoring the past could erase its resonance. This is the Slytherin timeline in miniature. The same train, the same smoke, but the boy on the platform is already a weapon being polished in the dark, scanning for any whisper of Peter Pettigrew. The compartment door slides open halfway through the journey, and the mission quietly accelerates. Ron Weasley stands there, awkward and hopeful. Beside him, in his hands, is the real problem: the rat. The reaction is instantaneous and utterly irrational. No memory, no image, no conscious link, only a lurch in his stomach and a cold, crawling revulsion under the scar, as if some buried soul resonance has just been struck like a gong. Harry's hand tightens on the seat before he even understands why. The sight of Scabbers feels wrong, like seeing a smiling face in a war photograph where everyone else is dead. He lets Ron sit. He smiles, makes the right noises, and then begins the gentlest interrogation of his life. How long have you had him? Was he always yours? Ever been ill? The questions are draped in casual interest, the voice of a lonely boy fascinated by any scrap of the magical world. But beneath that surface runs methodical certainty. This is data collection, not small talk. Ron, oblivious, answers with the guileless pride of someone who has never been hunted. Scabbers was Percy's before, apparently. He's ancient, useless, sleeps a lot, never does anything impressive. A hand-me-down pet from a hand-me-down life. To Ron, it's mildly embarrassing. To Harry, it is a timeline snapping into place. A rat, old enough to have survived Godric's Hollow, old enough to have vanished into a pure-blood household and stayed there, unremarked, for years. The pattern interrupt arrives in the form of Hermione Granger, all bushy hair, prefect energy, without the badge, and a mind already sharpening itself against rules. She notices, almost immediately, that Harry's gaze returns to the rat, more than to Ron, more than to her, more than to the castle they are racing toward. She files it away with clinical precision. Harry Potter is oddly fixated on a very ordinary pet. She does not mock him. She interrogates the anomaly in silence. Why would the boy who lived care so much about a sleeping rat? Her instinct for exceptions, for places where the rules fail to explain reality, quietly aligns her with him long before either of them understands the alliance being drafted. A masterpiece to be molded is watching another begin to shape herself. As the train begins its final approach, the chatter in the corridor swells. Houses, Quidditch, rumours of ghosts. Harry tunes it out. His eyes are on Scabbers, on the twitch of one paw, on the way the small body curls into Ron's jumper with practiced familiarity. If his instincts are right, if this crawling revulsion is not madness but warning, then the man who sold his parents to Voldemort has been sleeping for years in a Weasley boy's bed. And in a few minutes, that same betrayer may share his dormitory, his meals, his house. Enemy territory is not at the gates. It is already on the train, dozing in a child's hands. Sorting ceremony. Hero, weapon, or hunter. The doors of the great hall swing inward, as if on cue, and the boy who walks beneath the floating candles is not the wide-eyed orphan of canon, but a quiet strategist entering enemy territory with a map already sketched in his mind. The wizarding world believes this is the moment Hogwarts claims Harry Potter. They are wrong. When McGonagall calls his name, the whispering rises like static, a low-grade worship of the legend rather than the living weapon. Harry registers it, files it, and discards it. His attention is not on the star-strewn ceiling or the ghosts, but on the staff table, on Dumbledore's measured smile, and, without looking, on the distant, gnawing awareness of a rat curled in Ron Weasley's pocket. Every step to the stool is a calculation. 4 houses, 4 possible bases of operation for a very long hunt. In canon, this is where Draco Malfoy's sneer would push him away from Slytherin. In this timeline, Malfoy is irrelevant noise. Harry's mind is already dissecting options. Slytherin, proximity to old war families, to whispered accounts of 1981, to the kind of children who repeat their parents' secrets in the dark. Gryffindor, the golden facade, the perfect camouflage of schoolboy bravery behind which a colder mission could move unseen. Ravenclaw, books on Fidelius theory, on soul resonance, on animagi lore. Hufflepuff, the underestimated, the overlooked, the ideal place to vanish while tightening a noose. The hat drops over his eyes, and the great hall dissolves into velvet silence. What meets it is not childish excitement, but a dense, layered mind, shaped by eavesdropped arguments and one catastrophic accidental magic that exposed the echo of the secret in Petunia's kitchen. The hat tastes the memory of voices. Sirius, Dumbledore, names linked to betrayal and authority, and finds not only courage, but a ruthless, methodical certainty, more at home in war councils than playgrounds. It sifts through his intentions and recoils, fascinated. Here is not merely a frightened boy. Here is a weapon being polished in the dark, a masterpiece to be moulded, if someone dares. It sees the branching futures. In Slytherin, Harry becomes a curator of grudges, learning to pull pure blood histories like blades. In Ravenclaw, he dissects the Fidelius charm until the mark of his parents' hiding is no longer a mystery, but a solvable equation. In Hufflepuff, he disappears into the background, a quiet shadow watching Scabbers from across house tables. The dilemma is genuine. The hat is old, but not neutral. It remembers Tom Riddle, remembers the taste of ambition unmoored from empathy. Placing Harry with Slytherin's heirs would refine his cunning, give him direct access to the war's losers and their bitterness. Yet Gryffindor would grant him narrative cover. No one questions the Gryffindor hero who stumbles into danger, especially if that danger happens to involve a Weasley's pet. For the first time in his life, Harry understands he has leverage. The hat murmurs Slytherin with a seducer's certainty, but he thinks of Ron's open grin, of Molly Weasley's fussing hands, of the Weasley network spidering through the Ministry and Diagon Alley. He thinks of a dormitory where the betrayer sleeps inches from his wand hand. Gryffindor, he answers, not as a plea, but as a move, a trap to be laid inside the lion's den. The hat hesitates, then concedes, its shout of "Gryffindor!" ringing out like a verdict on a war no one else knows has begun. As the table erupts, the hat gives him one last whisper, a final private judgment. Be careful, Mr. Potter. Those who hunt rats sometimes become snakes without noticing. It is not a warning he intends to obey. It is a prophecy he fully expects to weaponize. Rewriting Year 1, the Philosopher's Stone in a hunter's hands. Rewriting first year in this timeline means understanding one simple correction to canon nostalgia. Hogwarts is not a wonderland for Harry Potter. It is a live hunting ground with a curriculum attached. The castle does not welcome a wide-eyed orphan. It receives a boy who already knows the name Peter Pettigrew and is quietly taking attendance. Classes, therefore, are not merely education. They are structured interrogations conducted under the guise of learning. In Transfiguration, when McGonagall explains animagi, Harry listens with a stillness that makes even Hermione glance sideways. The description of registration, the emphasis on legality, the passing mention that unregistered forms are a serious crime. Each phrase slots into his private dossier with methodical certainty. A rat animagus is no longer just a whispered hypothesis overheard through a keyhole on Privet Drive. It becomes a defined category of criminal, sanctioned by the very authority that later pretended not to know. History of magic, which Canon Harry drifts through in a bored haze, becomes something far darker. He endures Binns' droning with the patience of a sniper, waiting for specific words. Fidelius Charm, Godric's Hollow, the fall of the Potters. The lecture is bloodless, sanitized, But Harry is not listening to the story. He is listening for the omissions, where Bin skips, softens, or generalizes. Harry feels a cold resonance, a confirmation that adults have collectively decided to lie by omission. Every gap is a map. Every silence is evidence. The formation of the trio, in this context, is not a heartwarming accident. It is a convergence of damaged priorities. The troll incident still happens, but the pivot comes later. In a deserted corridor where Harry, brittle with sleeplessness, admits to Hermione that the official story of his parents' deaths is wrong. He does not name Pettigrew, not yet, but he outlines the contradictions with the precision of someone who has replayed the night of the 31st of October, 1981, 1,000 times. Hermione does not believe him immediately. She believes the data. They are wrong, she realizes, meaning the adults, the books, the entire curated narrative. Ron hears only fragments, caught between his affection for Scabbers and this new friend whose conviction feels like a curse. His loyalty fractures along a rat-shaped fault line. Quirrell and Snape, meanwhile, do not function as simple misdirection. Harry has already internalized that adults lie as a matter of policy. Surface appearances are just camouflage. Snape's open hostility is almost reassuring. A declared enemy is legible. Quirrell's stammering humility, by contrast, sets off alarms, precisely because it is so performative. Harry notes the burn on his hand after Gringotts, the way Quirrell flinches at loud noises, the faint smell of decay. He suspects something parasitic long before he understands possession. Yet the stone itself remains secondary. What matters is that Dumbledore is clearly orchestrating a hidden game, deploying Cerberus, enchantments, and the mirror, as if the castle were a private fortress. If he can hide a philosopher's stone beneath a school, Harry concludes, he can certainly hide the truth about a traitor. The mirror of Erised, when it finally confronts him, strips away his tactical composure. Canon Harry sees his parents. This Harry sees them alive, unscarred by war, standing in a kitchen that never exploded. Behind them, half obscured, a faceless silhouette with a rat's tail flickers at the edge of the glass, never fully resolving, always slipping away. The image is not a revelation, it is a verdict on his soul resonance. His deepest desire is not merely reunion, it is justice sharpened into retribution. The year still ends in the hospital wing, but the emotional geometry is reversed. Dumbledore offers explanations about love, sacrifice, and the stone's destruction, expecting gratitude. Harry listens, catalogues the evasions about Godric's Hollow, Pettigrew, and Azkaban, and walks away with a new axiom. If the headmaster can manipulate a Dark Lord with a mirror, he can manipulate an orphan with a myth. The boy who lived cannot afford to remain a child in this war. He goes back to Privet Drive not to endure another summer, but to plan the next phase of a hunt that in the Slytherin timeline is only just beginning, and the rat he seeks is already curled at the foot of a red-haired boy's bed. The first move has been played. The next will not be nearly so patient. Off-screen canon shifts. A world without an ignorant Harry. Off-screen, the world adjusts around him. It just doesn't realize it yet. Harry's questions begin as quiet blades slipped into ordinary conversations with methodical certainty. He asks McGonagall, with the polite intensity of a child who has memorized his own trauma, how a Fidelius charm truly works. Who can be a secret keeper, whether a secret keeper can hide themselves. She files it away as admirable curiosity until Flitwick, weeks later, mentions that Potter is obsessed with advanced concealment charms and keeps circling back to Animagi registration. The pattern is impossible to ignore. In this timeline, Dumbledore does not first meet an awestruck boy in a hospital wing. He meets a developing interrogator, and the reports on his desk read like early case notes on a witness who is assembling the crime scene on his own. The headmaster's response is not fear, it is calculation. If Harry is already pressing at the edges of the official narrative, then the carefully curated silence around Peter Pettigrew is no longer a static monument. It is a crumbling wall. Dumbledore begins to adjust lesson assignments, staff briefings, even which books are subtly harder for Harry to access in the library. The attempt is gentle containment. It feels to him like guidance. It feels to Harry like resistance. Beyond Hogwarts, the ripple widens into the Ministry, where paper is supposed to be safer than memory. One summer, after a particularly vicious argument with Petunia about criminal godfathers, Harry channels his fury into ink. The letter he sends to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement is blunt, graceless, and tactically lethal. Who was the Potter's secret keeper? Why was he never tried? And why has no one ever checked whether Sirius Black could have cast a Fidelius from Azkaban? They are wrong, he writes, to call this justice. By bureaucratic habit and a faint trace of old war protocol, that letter lands on Amelia Bones's desk. She reads it twice, feeling the cold resonance of names she buried under case files a decade ago. Officially, Pettigrew is a dead hero and Black a traitor. Unofficially, the logic in an 11-year-old scrawl is difficult to dismiss. A seed lodges. If the boy who lived is asking these questions, then perhaps the war's neat ending was not a victory, but an administrative fiction. The Weasley household, usually a fortress of warmth against the dark, is not spared. On the Hogwarts Express and in the Burrow's kitchen, Harry's fixation on Scabbers is first a joke, then an irritation, and finally an intrusion. Ron bristles, defending his ordinary rat with the brittle loyalty of a boy who has never had much that was just his. Molly waves it off, but Arthur Weasley listens. Arthur knows exactly how long a common rat should live. He knows how many catastrophes the Weasleys have survived with that animal inexplicably present in the background. In this timeline, his mild curiosity hardens into a quiet surveillance. He double-checks the family's old records, glances at the outdated Animagus registry, and begins to watch the way Scabbers watches back. Far away, in the shadowed corridors beneath a turban, Voldemort listens through Quirrell's reports and feels a different disturbance. The boy is not behaving like a grateful pawn. He is treating the world's narratives as hypotheses to be tested and discarded. That is not a martyr. That is a weapon being polished in the dark. For a mind built on manipulation, this represents not a challenge, but an eventual threat to authority itself. A soul resonance of defiance that will not yield to visions and half-truths. The tragedy for everyone else is inevitability. Once a child like this begins, pulling on the thread named Pettigrew, the post-war settlement is no longer a tapestry. It is a shroud with a tear running through the center. Somewhere between a staff meeting, a ministry memo, and a Weasley dinner, the first stitch gives way. What follows will not simply be the exoneration of Sirius Black. It will be the public dissection of the ministry's complacency, the Order's omissions, and Dumbledore's design. The Slytherin timeline does not explode. It unravels, slowly at first. Then, all at once, Year 2. The chamber opens under a different sky. Year 2 begins not with wonder, but with an experiment. At the burrow, under gingham tablecloths and the illusion of safety, Harry meets Scabbers again, not as Ron's pet, but as a suspect occupying enemy territory. In this timeline, his hand does not reach to scratch the rat behind the ears. It hovers, measuring flinch and breath, cataloguing how often the beady eyes track exits rather than food. He casts harmless household charms just a fraction too close, watches the way the fur bristles at Latin syllables that should mean nothing to a normal animal. To Ron, he laughs, shrugs, plays the easygoing friend. Internally, he is a weapon being polished in the dark, logging anomalies with methodical certainty. When Dobby crashes into Privet Drive and begs him not to return to Hogwarts, the axis of that conversation tilts. Canon Harry asks, who is in danger? This Harry asks who benefits. If the boy who lived stays away from the Weasleys, from their rat, from the one living witness to his parents' betrayal, who wins that private war? Dobby's panicked silence, his evasions about terrible things at school, read to Harry less as altruism and more as interference. Someone, somewhere, is willing to weaponize even a house elf's terror to keep him off the board. The diary, when it appears among Ginny's second-hand books, slots into this paranoia like a key into a waiting lock. A sentient record of 1940s Hogwarts is not merely a clue to the chamber, it is an archive of the First War's prelude. Night after night, Harry leans into the ink and interrogates Tom Riddle with an almost clinical focus, which students flirted with Grindelwald's ideology, which professors were sympathetic. How did the ministry respond to whispers of a basilisk beneath a school that fancied itself a fortress of learning? Riddle, amused, offers names, patterns, half-truths about spies and informants, feeling the soul resonance of another boy obsessed with betrayal. In this dance, Harry believes he is mining the past. In reality, he is circling closer to Voldemort's younger self, treating a future Dark Lord as a research tool. The attacks on Muggleborns fracture this already unstable equilibrium. Each body petrified in the corridors is, to the staff, a crisis of safety and reputation. To Harry, each boarder sent home, each parent panicked, is also a distraction from Pettigrew. Hermione's fall is the decisive blow. In canon, her loss is emotional. In the Slytherin timeline, it is operational. She is his only peer willing to entertain the animagus theory, to cross-reference obscure transfiguration cases with ministry disappearance records. When she freezes, so does his most analytical mirror. Forced into solitude, Harry's ethics erode under pressure. Nighttime forays, eavesdropping on staff meetings, quiet thefts from the library's restricted section. These are no longer thrilling deviations, but standard procedure. The basilisk becomes an obstacle to be neutralized. The chamber an intelligence target. Ginny a hostage to be extracted. Not simply a friend to be saved. He moves through catastrophe with tactically lethal focus. The year ends on paper as a triumph. The diary is destroyed. Ginny lives. The school reopens. Yet, as Harry stands in Dumbledore's office, Phoenix song curling through the air, the victory tastes thin. The headmaster praises his courage, his loyalty, his heart. They are wrong, Harry thinks. Those were not the qualities that opened the chamber. And when he asks again, quietly, insistently, why Peter Pettigrew was never hunted, never tried, never even named, Dumbledore's eyes cloud, and the answers dissolve into platitudes about timing and childhood. Harry leaves with two certainties: that he can kill a memory of Voldemort, and that Hogwarts' greatest authority will not help him catch the man who killed his parents. The chamber is closed. His private war is not. Next year, Azkaban's most infamous prisoner will escape. Harry is already sharpening the question the world has been asking in the wrong direction. The rat unmasked, prisoner of Azkaban, comes early. Next year, Azkaban's most infamous prisoner will escape. In this timeline, that escape is not a lightning bolt out of a clear sky. It is the inevitable backlash of a pressure Harry has been applying for years, a methodical certainty finally breaching the walls of the world's bleakest fortress. The tipping point comes in the stale heat of the summer before what canon would call Year 3. Scabbers is wheezing on Ron's pillow at the burrow. Fur, patchy, eyes dull. Yet his age is wrong in a way Harry can no longer ignore. He has heard Molly mention having the rat even before Percy. He has seen photographs that do not age, while the children in them do. So he asks the question no one else has the courage or cruelty to voice. How old is that rat? Really? The Weasleys laugh it off at first. They are wrong. Harry does not drop it. Days later, his quiet insistence corners Arthur in the kitchen. The wireless humming low, the burrow's crooked walls listening. Harry lays out the dates, the photographs, the missing toe he has finally noticed. Arthur, who works with records and regulations, feels a cold resonance and goes to the ministry files, not as a father humouring a guest, but as a man checking the foundations of his house for rot. There he finds it. An old, thin report on the remains of Peter Pettigrew, identified conveniently by a single finger, a match to a rat with a single missing toe. The moment is brutally simple. A war hero's death certificate becomes an arrest warrant in waiting. That document moves like a curse through the upper echelons. Dumbledore quietly reopens the black case file, the one he should have questioned a decade earlier. Amelia Bones is summoned, her legal mind tracing how a man could be condemned to Azkaban without trial on the testimony of the very traitor who escaped. In this Slytherin timeline, Sirius Black's eventual breakout is not a madman's lunge toward freedom. It is a weapon being polished in the dark, a godfather driven by soul resonance to the only child hunting his betrayer from another angle. When the shrieking shack tableau finally assembles, Remus shaking, Sirius skeletal, Pettigrew sweating under a wand point, Harry is not blindsided by the possibility of Sirius's innocence. He has already run the numbers, already realized that the official narrative was a masterpiece to be molded, not a truth to be honored. The real shock is how long the adults sat on the evidence once Scabbers' file crossed their desks, how easily authority chose silence over correction. Face to face with the man who sold his parents, Harry's mercy is a frayed, tactical calculation rather than a reflex. Years of obsessing over betrayal have carved deep grooves in his psyche. This is not a Gryffindor boy pleading for a life, but a tactically lethal adolescent deciding whether Pettigrew is more valuable dead or alive as bait. It takes Hermione's hand on his wrist, the imagined weight of James and Lily watching, to keep the killing curse unspoken. And still, the rat escapes. But now he runs as a named traitor, not a hidden pet. The war's pieces scatter years ahead of schedule. Predators and prey all suddenly visible on the board. Harry walks out of the shrieking shack, not as a child who has stumbled into the truth, but as the architect of its revelation, an emerging power Dumbledore cannot easily redirect. The question, as the Ministry reels and Voldemort listens, is no longer whether Harry will break the system, it is who exactly he intends to break it for. Power as discipline, how the hunt shapes Harry's magic. Power, for this Harry, is never an abstract promise. It is architecture. In this timeline, his magic grows the way a fortress rises from bedrock. Each stone laid in answer to a single obsessive question. How do you prevent betrayal from ever slipping through again? The cupboard under the stairs is not only a prison, it is the foundation trench, the echo of the secret, that first accidental resonance of overheard names and half-truths becomes the cornerstone, the moment his soul resonance aligns not with wonder, but with surveillance. When he reaches Hogwarts, the contrast is almost obscene. Other first years gape at floating candles and moving staircases. Harry is already measuring sightlines, exits, and how sound travels through stone. Every charm Flitwick demonstrates is silently reclassified. Can it gather information, defend against manipulation, or corner prey? Lumos is not a toy for late-night exploring. It is a way to read expressions in the dark. The invisibility cloak, when it comes, is not a marvel of family legacy. It is a field upgrade. This is why his internal discipline precedes any formal training. Before anyone whispers the word occlumency, Harry has already learned to compartmentalize with an almost pathological precision. One face for teachers, respectful, curious, malleable. Another for friends, wry, apparently open, never quite vulnerable. And behind both, a sealed vault where the raw, incandescent hatred of Peter Pettigrew is compressed until it hums. He does not know the names of mental walls or mind arts, but he knows how to lie with his eyes and keep his pulse steady while adults try to read him. They call it childhood resilience. They are wrong. The so-called abnormalities of his magic become, in his own analysis, specialized tools. Parseltongue is not a shameful mark of the dark. It is a private interrogation channel. He seeks out snakes in the castle walls, in the grounds, even in pipes, learning to question the overlooked witnesses that slither through cracks like a rat. His flying talent, too, is reframed. Quidditch is a distraction. The broom is pursuit, altitude, and angle. He learns how it feels to stalk a target from above, to track movement across a battlefield that his peers still call a pitch. Consequently, the disciplines he gravitates toward form a coherent doctrine of the hunter. Detection charms, revealing spells, and basic warding become his daily scales and arpeggios. Later, anything to do with tracking, binding, and anchoring a presence in place draws him with almost religious focus. Flashy jinxes, dramatic transfigurations, theatrical dueling flourishes. These are entertainment for a world still pretending war is distant. Harry invests instead in the quiet, methodical certainty of ward makers and trackers, the magic that determines who is allowed to move and who is not. This psychological conditioning is both his sharpest blade and his slowest poison. His capacity for delayed gratification, for planning across years rather than days, makes him tactically lethal even as a child. He can sit on information, nurture relationships as assets, and wait for the exact moment a net should tighten. But the same discipline erodes his ability to trust rest as anything but vulnerability. Sleep is a truce with exhaustion, not a right. Friendship is a corridor to potential leverage, not a sanctuary. He does not see himself as a boy who happens to wield power. He is a weapon being polished in the dark, an instrument aimed with unwavering precision at Pettigrew's heart. The tragedy is simple. In fortifying himself against one betrayal, Harry is quietly building a fortress he may never know how to leave. And Hogwarts, sensing this emerging architecture, will answer with defenses of its own. Dumbledore's countermove. The headmaster loses the script. Hogwarts answers with defenses of its own. Dumbledore assumes, at first, that time will do his work for him, that the sharp edges of Harry's questions will be sanded down by classes, Quidditch, and adolescent distraction. That grief will blur into mythology the way it always does in a world addicted to legends. They are wrong. Each year in this timeline functions instead as a whetstone. Every encounter with ministry hypocrisy, every glimpse of Pettigrew's continued survival, only hones the blade. The miscalculation crystallizes in a single evening, when Harry is summoned to the headmaster's office under the pretext of clarifying certain matters after a particularly public confrontation with a ministry envoy. The room is exactly as canon remembers it. Whirring instruments, dozing portraits, the illusion of benevolent clutter, but the resonance is different. This is not a grandfatherly sanctuary. It is a command center disguised as an attic. Harry sits, uninvited. The silence stretches. Then he begins, not with anger, but with methodical certainty that feels tactically lethal. Who chose the secret keeper? Who proposed the switch? Who recorded the Fidelius? Who signed off in the Order's inner circle on entrusting the Potters' lives to a man whose animagus form could vanish into any gutter in Britain? Why, when Sirius Black was dragged to Azkaban without trial, no one in authority demanded a body for the street exploded? Peter Pettigrew. Why a rat's missing corpse has never once been treated as a live case file, only as a convenient myth? Dumbledore answers, at first, with the familiar tools, gentle deflection, partial truths, a sorrowful admission that mistakes were made in war. But in this Slytherin timeline, Harry has already dismantled ministry narratives in public, already traced the bureaucratic fingerprints that kept Sirius in chains and Pettigrew in a schoolboy's pocket. The old instruments of soft control simply fail to catch. Internally, the headmaster is forced into an accounting he has delayed for over a decade. He looks at Harry and sees, simultaneously, a weapon he has been counting on and a masterpiece to be molded that is refusing the chisel. The boy's soul resonance with conflict is unmistakable. He absorbs institutional failure not as tragedy, but as actionable intelligence. Dumbledore's instinct to protect the child, the prophecy, the fragile equilibrium of a war-scarred world, collides with his instinct to control the narrative that will carry them all through Voldemort's return. So he attempts a different gambit, a soft power play, wrapped in contrition. More information he offers, but on his terms. Glimpses into the First War, access to certain Order records, even veiled acknowledgement of ministry complicity, if Harry will accept a deferment. Full truth after Voldemort's final defeat. Trust now, answers later. It is, in Dumbledore's mind, a necessary sequencing of revelations. To a child forged by betrayal, it sounds indistinguishable from another betrayal in progress. Harry rises without raising his voice. The portraits pretend to sleep more deeply. When he leaves, the status inversion is absolute. He does not feel like a chastened student dismissed from a headmaster's lecture. He feels like a hostile auditor who has just confirmed that the most powerful wizard in Britain is afraid. Not of the Dark Lord, but of what happens when the boy who lived stops playing his assigned role and starts writing his own script. And outside that office, the fortress of Hogwarts begins to align, consciously or not, around that emerging fact. A different war. Voldemort returns to a less forgiving world. Hogwarts adjusts around him. The wider world does not. The wizarding public still clings to the reassuring myth that the boy who lived is a passive symbol, a child to be shepherded by wiser hands. In this timeline, they are wrong. Pettigrew's unmasking in Harry's second year detonates like a controlled charge beneath the old war's foundations. The rat does not slip quietly into history as a loyal servant who died bravely. He becomes a living indictment paraded through Wisengamot hearings, his testimony dragging half-forgotten names back into the light. Safe houses are compromised, old Death Eater caches seized, informant networks snapped. Voldemort's safety net, those half-committed sympathizers who might have offered gold, shelter, or silence, is burned years ahead of schedule, leaving only the fanatics and the truly desperate. For the Dark Lord, resurrection becomes a problem of logistics as much as ritual. When he finally reconstitutes a body, it is not with the easy confidence of a general returning to a waiting army, but with the brittle awareness that his most useful proxy has already been broken on the altar of public scrutiny. The irony is clinical. The man who once survived by being underestimated now returns to a world primed to see rats. The graveyard still happens. Harry walks into that circle, not as a bewildered child dragged by portkey and plot, but as someone who has spent years charting Voldemort's methods, his use of cutouts, his reliance on men like Pettigrew to do the dirty work and absorb the blame. He notes the wand movements, the sequence of the ritual, the way Voldemort positions his followers for maximum spectacle. Even as his blood is taken, he is cataloguing. The terror is still there. The ignorance is not. When wands lock and the priori incantatum flares, Harry is not astonished that Voldemort lies about what this means. He has read those lies before, in Pettigrew's depositions, in the euphemisms of ministry transcripts. He recognizes propaganda in real time. That recognition hardens him more than the pain. So when the ministry attempts its canonical denial, it collides with an inconvenient record. This is the boy who forced them to reopen the Black case, who produced a living Death Eater once declared dead and buried. Fudge can bluster, Skeeter can sneer, but every aura, every clerk in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement remembers the day Peter Pettigrew, registered deceased, sat in chains beneath the enchanted ceiling. Harry's credibility is not theoretical. It is filed, stamped, and archived. The Order of the Phoenix adjusts accordingly. They cannot keep him as a mushroom, fed rumors, starved of context, because he has already demonstrated that given a crack in the narrative, he will pry it open with methodical certainty. Grimmauld Place becomes less a hidden barracks and more a contested war room where a teenager who has been hunting their enemy's servant since childhood now demands to see maps, casualty lists, and names. Dumbledore is still the strategist, but he is no longer the sole keeper of the board. On the other side, Voldemort returns to a colder, sharper equilibrium. His rat has already been dragged into the light. His opponents are less naive. The boy who lived has grown up not on bedtime stories of heroism, but on the anatomy of betrayal. The Slytherin timeline of this war is tactically lethal precisely because no one expects mercy to be the default currency. The next move for both sides is no longer about who will fight. It is about how far they are willing to go once the last illusions have been stripped away. The illusions fall early. In canon, Harry's understanding of the Marauders detonates in third year, a single catastrophic revelation that rearranges his loyalties overnight. In this timeline, the same truth arrives as a slow, grinding pressure, half-heard arguments through privet drive walls, a carelessly worded letter from an Order contact. Petunia's spiteful slip about the friend who walked Voldemort to their door. By the time he reaches Hogwarts, Harry has already spent years inhabiting the aftermath of one decision, the secret keeper switch. As if it were a personal climate, this changes everything about how the Marauders' legend lands. There is no golden haze around James and Sirius that must later be burned away. Their heroism and their failure are twinned from the beginning, fused into a single, uncomfortable soul resonance. James is not just the Quidditch star and prankster general. He is the young commander who misread his own battlefield, who trusted the wrong man with the coordinates of his family. Sirius is not the wronged martyr of Azkaban. He is the architect of the switch, the one who proposed hiding the key inside the weakest link. Harry studies that choice like an autopsy report. He reads between Remus's pauses, between Dumbledore's omissions, between the Ministry's official narrative that still names Black as traitor. The world wants a simple partition, James and Sirius as bright, Peter as dark. They are wrong. The Marauder's legacy, as Harry encounters it, is a case study in how courage, arrogance, and love can combine into a tactically lethal vulnerability. Remus becomes the unwilling historian of this private war. In canon, he is a melancholy mentor who parcels out the past in careful, anesthetized doses. Here, Harry refuses anesthetic. He corners Lupin in empty classrooms, in the humming silence of the staff room after curfew, and demands the unvarnished version. Who doubted whom when the Order began to fracture? Which names were floated as potential traitors before Peter? Which missions went wrong because someone trusted a joke instead of a plan? Remus, already a fortress of guilt, is forced to open his gates and walk Harry through every corridor. The artifacts arrive like examinations, not gifts. The invisibility cloak is no longer simply a marvel. It is the shroud James wore while playing at war, believing himself untouchable. The Marauder's map, when Harry eventually claims it, reads as both brilliance and indictment. How did 4 boys who could see every footprint in Hogwarts miss the rat at their own table? In this timeline, Harry does not just accept the title Marauder as a romantic inheritance. He interrogates it, then rewrites it. He chooses consciously what to take forward. From James, he keeps the willingness to stand in the doorway when the curse is coming, but discards the reflex to treat danger as a game. From Sirius, he takes ferocity, stripped of the impulse to improvise with people's lives. From Remus, he inherits the discipline to plan 3 moves ahead, without letting caution calcify into paralysis. The map, the cloak, even the name itself become instruments in a different symphony, a weapon being polished in the dark, not against his friends, but against the blind spots that once killed his parents. The pattern interrupt comes quietly. One evening in the library, parchment spread, alliances mapped like battlefronts, Harry freezes over a single, deceptively simple question. If the first generation of Marauders were destroyed by the friend they failed to see clearly, what does it mean for him to build a new circle? Ron, with his easy loyalty, Hermione with her fierce rationality, perhaps even Draco circling at the edge of truce. while knowing with methodical certainty how easily trust can be weaponized. The answer will define whether the marauder's legacy is a closed loop of tragedy or a blueprint finally corrected. Friendship under surveillance. Ron, Hermione, and the shadow of the rat. The first crack in that blueprint appears not in a battlefield, but on a rattling train compartment, where friendship arrives carrying a cage. Ron Weasley sits down with the easy, uncalculated loyalty Harry has only ever seen in old photographs. He offers sandwiches, jokes about his brothers, glances at Harry's scar with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. It should be disarming. It should be simple. They are 11. They are wrong. Because in Harry's peripheral vision, there is always the rat. In this timeline, Scabbers is not an afterthought. He is a target profile. Every squeak, every twitch of whisker hits Harry like a memory of overheard whispers on Privet Drive. Names like Pettigrew and Secret Keeper pressed into his nervous system with methodical certainty. When Ron proudly explains that Scabbers has been in the family for years, Harry's smile tightens by a millimeter. The conversation about chocolate frog cards is warm. The silence around the cage is a fortress. The strain is immediate and profoundly inarticulate. Ron reads Harry's fixed gaze on Scabbers as judgment of a shabby pet, a class embarrassment. Harry hears Ron's casual affection for the rat as a kind of treason against the dead. Moments that should have been easy, laughing over exploding Snap, groaning about homework, are cross-cut by tiny collisions, Harry suggesting, a bit too sharply, that Scabbers looks unhealthy, Ron bristling, defending the rat with the same instinct he uses for his family. Loyalty to a pet, loyalty to a friend, grinding together in a war neither boy has language for. Hermione enters as an irritant, then becomes a mirror. Where Ron offers comfort, she offers interrogation. Harry chooses her as the first person to hear the full architecture of his theory. The overheard order names, the dates, the uncanny coincidence of a missing animagus, and a Weasley rat who never ages. Her initial response is textbook. Trust the adults, trust the official story. But the data will not let her rest. In the library's dim light, surrounded by dust and authority, she lets the possibility bloom that the wizarding world's narrative of hero and traitor is wrong at the molecular level. Their partnership becomes a quiet, tactically lethal project. Hermione hunts legal records of Pettigrew's death, obscure animagus registration laws, case histories of wrongful conviction. Harry supplies motive, soul resonance, the emotional geometry of betrayal. Together, they construct a case strong enough to challenge adult authority, and in doing so, they fuse their identities around truth-seeking. This is not homework. This is war. When Pettigrew is finally exposed, the detonation is not just in a shrieking shack or a ministry chamber. It is inside the trio themselves. Ron's sense of home is contaminated, the burrow retrospectively recast as a sanctuary that unknowingly harbored a weapon being polished in the dark. Hermione's faith in institutions fractures. If the Ministry and Dumbledore can be this catastrophically wrong, What else in the Slytherin timeline is built on sand? And Harry, who entered Hogwarts carrying his knowledge like contraband, discovers an almost unbearable relief. At last, 2 people stand inside the blast radius with him. But the overcorrection is its own danger. Having been vindicated about Pettigrew, Harry's instincts skew toward paranoia. A withheld letter, a half-truth from Dumbledore. Even Hermione's decision to delay telling him about a rumour becomes, in his mind, the first step toward another betrayal. Ron and Hermione must learn new roles. Ron as the one who refuses to walk away when Harry lashes out. Hermione as the one who can say, with surgical precision, when his fear is evidence and when it is ghost. The image that defines this phase is not a Quidditch pitch or a cozy common room, but a library table at midnight. 3 figures lean over advanced charms texts and dense legal procedure, quills scratching, faces set. They are planning exam schedules, yes, but also potential testimony, chains of custody, ways to force a world built on comfortable lies to confront its own records. They are no longer innocent children. They are a nascent cell, drafting the narrative of the next war. Harry as reluctant prosecutor. They think the fallout will be contained to a dormitory scuffle and a single captured rat. They are wrong. In the Slytherin timeline, exposing Peter Pettigrew is not an epilogue. It is an opening statement. The moment the Aurors prise a trembling, half-transfigured man out of Ron Weasley's arms, the quiet question that has been stalking the edges of every Daily Prophet headline finally steps into the light. How did Sirius Black reach Azkaban without a trial, while a registered animagus vanished into a schoolboy's pocket? That question has a name attached to it now: Harry Potter. The first inquiry is framed as routine, a closed-door fact-finding session, a necessary procedural review after the regrettable oversight of an escaped convict and a misidentified corpse. In reality, it is the Ministry constructing a legal fortress around its own past. Harry is summoned as victim, as witness, as symbol. The boy who heard Pettigrew hissed on Privet Drive and turned a childhood nightmare into an arrest warrant. He walks into wood-panelled rooms that smell of ink, dust, and fear, and realizes that the adults are more afraid of his questions than of his scar. He never wanted this. Fame, headlines, the sole resonance of a world projecting its fantasies onto his name. These were always liabilities to be minimized. But in this timeline, Harry has been taught to weaponize leverage. If the boy who lived can force the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to reopen Sirius Black's file, he will. If his testimony can trigger audits of Azkaban sentences, demand transcripts that do not exist, expose that no one ever verified Pettigrew's remains, he will. The child the world thought it knew as a symbol becomes something more tactically lethal, the boy who asked the wrong questions. The resistance is immediate and polished. Cornelius Fudge appears in hearings like an overfed peacock, insisting that Pettigrew was a lone aberration, a tragic clerical failure in an otherwise noble war. Yet Harry arrives armed not only with memory, but with Hermione's methodical certainty. He references animagus registration logs that stop abruptly in 1981, cross-references oral field reports with prophet photographs, points out that no formal Wisengamot record exists for Sirius Black's conviction because there was no conviction. Each calm, precise observation shifts the narrative from individual guilt to institutional rot. This is where the war behind the war begins. While Voldemort regathers power in the dark, the Ministry is forced into a defensive crouch, expending energy on press conferences, internal reviews, and the quiet intimidation of potential whistleblowers. Harry's pursuit of justice destabilizes the very authority structures he will later need as bulwarks. Every truth he drags into the light cracks another pillar of the system meant to resist the coming storm. It is a morally contaminated victory. Necessary. Damaging. Picture the climactic hearing. Harry stands in a high, wood-panelled chamber, wand at his side, school robes hanging like ill-fitting judicial robes. Voice level as he describes the night on Privet Drive when he first heard the name Pettigrew and watched the streetlights flicker under his rage. The chamber thinks it is judging a case. In reality, it is being indicted by a child. And as his final words fall into a charged silence, another, older name waits unsaid on his tongue, one he is not yet certain it is safe to accuse. The cost of knowing what this Harry loses, the silence that follows his testimony, is not triumph. It is the sound of something vital calcifying. The chamber hears an avenging prodigy. In this timeline, what actually stands before them is a childhood that never got to be anything but forensic. The first cost is simple and devastating. There is no unshadowed Hogwarts. From the moment the boats cut across the Black Lake, the castle is not a sanctuary rising out of the dark. It is a crime scene made of stone. Every corridor is a potential escape route for a rat animagus. Every portrait is a possible witness that failed his parents. Every adult is one more candidate for the sentence. They are wrong. That has been burning behind his teeth since Privet Drive. Where Canon Harry gapes at moving staircases, this Harry maps them. Wonder is replaced by methodical certainty. That reconfiguration of the castle mirrors the reconfiguration of his inner life. Years spent tracing the name Pettigrew through half-heard conversations and accidental magic have narrowed his emotional bandwidth into a single blazing channel. Joy is permitted only in the negative space around the hunt. A game of chess with Ron is not simply a game. It is an assessment of loyalty under pressure. A late-night conversation with Hermione is never only about homework. It is an interrogation of how she thinks, how she might break, whether she could be turned. Vulnerability becomes a calculated exposure, never a reflex. Even laughter feels like a lapse in perimeter security. He avoids some canonical shocks. Yes, there is no third-year shattering where the heroic godfather is suddenly revealed as a murderer, because Sirius Black arrives in his life already under cross-examination, a case file to be reopened rather than a pedestal to be toppled. But the alternate trauma is slower and, in many ways, crueler. A prolonged, low-grade paranoia, a childhood conducted under the weight of secrets he was never meant to carry alone. The Dursleys' petty cruelties are no longer the central wound. they become merely the beige wallpaper around a much darker obsession. His victories, when they come, are not clean. Pettigrew unmasked years early, Sirius freed before Azkaban can finish hollowing him out, the Ministry forced to confront its own negligence. On parchment, these are unambiguous goods. In practice, each success accelerates the war. Exposure of a Death Eater animagus destabilizes Fudge's regime sooner, drags Harry into hearings, interviews, strategy sessions, at an age when Canon Harry is sneaking butterbeer into Hogsmeade. This version is reading legislation, learning who controls budgets for aura deployments, discovering that authority is simply another battlefield. The result is a boy who is undeniably more competent, more informed, and tactically lethal. He learns occlumency not as a desperate fifth-year patch, but as a necessary armor for a mind already treated as a vault of evidence. He begins to look at people the way Dumbledore once looked at him, as leverage, as liabilities, as pieces in a war that has never really ended. The Slytherin timeline is not the only one that can produce a weapon being polished in the dark. Here, Gryffindor colours simply mask a different kind of masterpiece to be moulded. And this is the real cost. Harry does not merely lose innocence, he loses the possibility of ever believing that his choices are purely his own. Surrounded by adults who lied, institutions he has indicted, and friends he has quietly assessed for betrayal, he stands forever on the brink of becoming the very strategist he once feared Dumbledore to be. The question is no longer whether he will win, but what, by the end, will be left of the boy who wanted more than war. Some viewers will insist this is an upgrade, a stronger Harry, a better world. They are wrong. The next phase of this timeline will show why. Rewinding canon, seeing the original story with new eyes. To understand why they are wrong, we have to rewind, not to change canon, but to stain it, lightly, with the knowledge this Harry carries as a weapon being polished in the dark. In canon, it is a rescue framed as revelation. Hagrid bursts through the door, the wizarding world unfurls, and Harry's ignorance is treated as innocence. In this timeline, that scene acquires a new dissonant resonance. An 11-year-old who already knows the word Pettigrew, who has heard, half-whispered through the walls of Privet Drive, that the Ministry closed the file with methodical certainty, does not simply accept Hagrid's halting story about a car crash and a Dark Lord. He is listening for omissions. He hears Dumbledore's name and silently adds it to the list. The sorting ceremony, too, becomes a different kind of crucible. Canon Harry walks to the stool bewildered, still reeling from the revelation that he is famous. Here, he arrives with a mission and a memory of betrayal that has been gnawing at him for years. The hat's probing becomes an interrogation layered over another. It senses ambition, distrust, the cold desire to hunt a rat animagus hiding somewhere in this fortress of stone and tradition. Its warning about Slytherin no longer reads as a moral fork in the road, but as institutional damage control, a system trying to steer a volatile asset away from the house best suited to refine him into a tactically lethal instrument. now overlay the shrieking shack. In canon, that confrontation erupts out of coincidence and delayed truth. Harry discovers in a single night that Sirius is innocent, Pettigrew is alive, and the adults have lied for 12 years. Imagine that same chamber under the Slytherin timeline's logic, where Harry has spent 3 years watching Scabbers with narrowed eyes, noting the unnatural length of the rat's life, the way adults flinch at the name Peter, and then drown it in silence. The shack is no longer a revelation, it is confirmation. A child's private conspiracy board, made manifest in rotting wood and moonlight. Seen this way, canon itself begins to confess. The gaps in Dumbledore's explanations, the Ministry's eagerness to anoint easy villains, from Sirius to Hagrid to Muggle-born children, stop reading as mere plot conveniences and start revealing a world built on narrative control. The real engine of the series is not prophecy or wands, but information. Who hoards it, who weaponizes it, and what happens when a boy refuses to stay blind. A reread under this lens turns the margins dangerous. How many other Pettigrews skulk at the edges of the story, their betrayals deferred until they are politically useful to unveil? How many truths arrive precisely when adult agendas require them, wrapped as guidance but functioning as leashes? In this timeline, Harry's early knowledge of the traitor is not a replacement for canon, but a diagnostic tool, a way of exposing the scaffolding behind the narrative. The cupboard door blows open a few years earlier, and everything looks different. The next step is to follow that altered gaze forward, into each year, each war, each choice, and measure what survives once ignorance is no longer an option. If the boy who lived refused to be lied to, the altered gaze begins in a cupboard on Privet Drive, but its shockwaves reach the Ministry atrium and the headmaster's office. One overheard argument, one name, Pettigrew, slipping like a curse through the keyhole, and one burst of accidental magic that tears the door from its hinges. In that instant, the boy who lived ceases to be a passive relic of a past war and becomes an active hunter in a present one. In this timeline, Harry walks into Hogwarts not as an empty vessel waiting to be filled with legend, but as a child already triangulating lies. The Sorting Hat's whisper becomes a negotiation, not a revelation. The question is no longer, who are you? But what do you need to become to catch a rat who once sold a family for survival? First year reconfigures around that mission. The stone is less a marvel than a test of Dumbledore's judgment. Quirrell less a monster than a data point in a growing file on institutional failure. The consequences compound with methodical certainty. The reimagined Chamber of Secrets is not simply a basilisk hunt, but an early case study in how the school buries its own crimes. Ginny Weasley's possession becomes evidence, not just tragedy. Pettigrew and Sirius are dragged into the light years ahead of schedule, tearing open the Marauder's legacy in public, forcing the Ministry to admit that its celebrated narrative of closure was built on a living man in Azkaban and a traitor sleeping in a Gryffindor dormitory. Dumbledore's quiet omissions harden into a pattern Harry can name. The headmaster's authority cracks, not in a final duel, but in a series of small, televised embarrassments. Underneath the plot mechanics, the central theme is brutally simple. This is a story about information as power, and about what happens when the child at the center of a myth refuses to be its passive subject. Harry insists on seeing the redacted lines, the ugly paperwork, the ministry memos that explain why no one checked a broken wand or questioned a rat with a missing toe. The legend of the boy who lived becomes, in his own hands, a case file. The magic is still there, but it is cross-examined. The result is a Harry who is harder, sharper, less trusting. A weapon being polished in the dark, but by his own hand. The question that lingers is not whether this makes him stronger. It almost certainly does. The question is whether this is the version the wizarding world actually needed, or whether the damage has merely shifted. Lives saved on one branch of the timeline. New scars carved into an 11-year-old who learns to see allies as unreliable narrators and mentors as potential co-conspirators. So this is where we leave him for now, standing at the threshold of later wars, already reading between the lines of prophecy, already measuring every adult explanation against the Pettigrew lie that started it all. The next moves belong to you. How does this Harry approach the Triwizard Tournament when he treats every contract as a trap? How does he hunt Horcruxes when he has been conditioned to distrust the very institutions that once guided him? Does the Deathly Hallows tempt a boy who has already seen what secrecy does to a world? If you see a different branch, if your Harry turns this early knowledge into reconciliation rather than escalation, or into something far more tactically lethal, lay it out in the comments. And if you want to keep dissecting canon as a map of roads not taken rather than scripture, subscribe, stay with this series, and we will continue to open cupboards early, tilt single conversations, and watch entire wars realign around the information a child is finally allowed to know.